In the early morning hours of December 6th, 2014, a man named Rob Leef was too excited to sleep. While almost everyone else in his Austin, Texas neighborhood had called it a night, he was busy walking the quiet residential streets, geeking out over a cool new piece of tech he had recently purchased. The device in question was a scope for one of his rifles, which was equipped with a thermal imaging camera. The camera was designed to detect heat radiation given off by living things, and essentially allowed Rob to see in the dark. This is why he was out despite the late hour. He was hoping to get some footage of deer, and since his neighborhood backed onto a sizable plot of woodland, this seemed like the perfect time and place for a test. It turned out that Rob's instincts couldn't have been more correct, though not in the way that he initially anticipated. You see, while shuffling through the settings of his camera that morning, he inadvertently recorded something a whole lot more interesting than the local wildlife. Before we get to today's story, if you find our content interesting and informative and haven't already, we'd be honored if you take a second to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell. It helps you to keep up to date with our latest releases, and helps us to keep up with that pesky, ever-changing YouTube algorithm. With that out of the way, let's get to the video. To anyone that knew her, it was clear that Kathy Blair believed in the power of music, not only as a means of self-expression, but as a way to unite people, to create community, and to bring more beauty into the world. Born in Burbank, California in 1961, Kathy's love for music began at an early age. As a child, she was always singing, and it soon became clear to those around her that she had a talent that more than rivaled her passion. After finishing high school, Kathy continued to nurture her gift. She moved to Austin, Texas, quickly falling in love with the city and its flourishing music scene, and ended up attending the University of Texas, where she earned a master's in vocal performance. While many people with Kathy's talents might have tried to chase fame and fortune in the music industry, after finishing school, she found a different way to share her passion with the world: teaching. In the meantime, she got married and had 2 children, Hannah and Joe. While she was unlucky in love and ended up getting divorced twice, her children were always the center of her world. In 1995, Kathy seemed to find her true artistic calling when she took over as choir director with the Christian Choral Society of Austin. She worked primarily with homeschooled students, teaching as many as 350 per year who ranged in age from 4 all the way up to their late teens. Over the next 2 decades, Kathy would go on to touch the lives of countless young people through the Choral Society. Many would go on to successfully audition for the all-state choir, while some would even pursue professional music careers. Speaking about her later in an interview, one such former student described her choice to become a musician, saying that it was Kathy's passion and belief in her that made her feel like it was possible. As is the case with so many extraordinary teachers, though, Kathy's impact went beyond just the thing that she was there to teach. To her students, she became a role model, a mentor, and a second mother. She took an interest in their lives and spared no amount of time or money when it came to giving them the best experiences possible. For example, many would later fondly remember building and designing stage sets for the various musical productions that the Choral Society would put on. When they did, Kathy always volunteered to turn her house into their makeshift workshop. It was impossible not to notice the lively atmosphere and community that she created amongst those around her. One of her friends jokingly referred to it as the Kathy Nation. While Kathy seemed destined to continue teaching and inspiring students for countless years to come, little did anyone know that she would never get that chance. Sadly, things were about to come to a terrifying and heartbreaking end. Just before 12:15 p.m. on December 6th, 2014, dispatchers with the Austin Police Department received a disturbing 911 call. It came from an address on the 4600 block of Tamarack Trail located in the city's suburban northern outskirts. The call was from Kathy's son Joe, who had just gotten home, only to make a horrifying discovery.
I think my mom is dead. There's a lot of blood. I think someone broke in and killed my mom.
Joe, what's your mom's name?
Her name is Kathy Blair.
When officers arrived at the residence, they were greeted by a chilling scene in the master bedroom. There was blood everywhere, and Kathy's body was lying next to her bed on the floor. An autopsy would soon reveal that the 53-year-old had died from a combination of stab wounds to her chest and neck, as well as asphyxiation. Defensive wounds on her hands made it apparent that she had fought for her life. Not far from Kathy's bed was a large jewelry box, all of the drawers from which had been removed and thrown onto the floor. At first, the stolen jewelry seemed to suggest that burglary had been the motive behind the crime. However, when investigators took a closer look, they weren't quite sure. Nothing in the rest of the house had been touched, including other valuables that were in plain sight, such as Kathy's laptop, phone, and television. Not only that, but there was blood on the jewelry box and in several other areas of the bedroom, suggesting that it hadn't been ransacked until after Kathy was killed. Finally, it appeared that the killer had entered through the back door, which Kathy kept unlocked. Taking all these details together, detectives began to piece together a theory. They speculated that Kathy had been the victim of a targeted killing. This person had known the easiest way to get into her house and had attacked her while she was sleeping. The rest of the scene had simply been staged to look like a burglary in an attempt to cover their tracks. Unfortunately, it soon became clear to authorities that finding this person wasn't going to be easy. Aside from a bloody shoe print that had been left in the bedroom, there was no physical evidence recovered at the scene. However, if their theory was correct and the attack was targeted, it meant that someone out there had a motive for killing Kathy Blair. Investigators weren't sure what it was, but they knew that there was only one way to find out. After analyzing the disturbing crime scene, detectives with the Austin Police Department began their investigation into Kathy Blair's murder by interviewing those close to her to see if they could uncover a motive. Naturally, they started with her son Joe, who had been the one to discover Kathy's body. Joe explained that at the time of the killing, he had been staying with his mother while awaiting assignment in the Navy. On the night of December 5th, he had gone to a party with some friends and had ended up crashing overnight there with a few people. He hadn't come home until around noon the following day, which was when he made the horrifying discovery and called 911. Police looked into Joe's alibi, and everything added up, and he was quickly eliminated as a suspect. While speaking to Kathy's friends, police learned that the 53-year-old had spent her entire day leading up to her death helping her choir students prepare for a performance at Pioneer Farms, a living history museum and tourist attraction in the city. After the performance, she had told several people that she was looking forward to going home and having a relaxing weekend. This helped to reinforce the timeline of the case. Kathy had been killed sometime between getting home on the night of December 5th and the morning of December 6th. As for who could have had a motive for wanting Kathy dead, no one seemed certain, though one possible person of interest was brought to the attention of investigators several times: Kathy's second husband. Those closest to Kathy said that even though they had already been divorced for 4 years, things were still extremely bitter between her and her ex. Moreover, it appeared that Kathy feared for her safety. When she had moved into the house she was renting on Tamarack Trail several months back, she had specifically asked her friends and her landlord not to reveal that she was living there, and had even outright said to a few people that she wanted the new residence to be a place her ex would never find. Understandably concerned by this information, police paid a visit to Kathy's former husband at his residence just outside the Austin city limits. Almost immediately, he set off red flags for detectives when, upon being informed of his ex-wife's death, instead of asking what had happened, he asked, "Was she shot?" As bizarre as this was, though, the man offered an alibi for his whereabouts on the night of Kathy's murder, saying that he had been camping at an RV park. He also agreed to let officers conduct a search of his house, where nothing incriminating or unusual was found. Police were still suspicious, but with nothing actually connecting the ex-husband to the case, they decided to move on for the time being and pursue other leads. One of these leads came from a friend of Kathy's who called detectives roughly a week into the investigation about another potential person of interest. The friend explained that they and some others had thrown an impromptu memorial for Kathy at a local business, during which, out of nowhere, a man that no one seemed to recognize got up and started talking about her. The man had an unsettling demeanor, and what was stranger, from the way he was speaking, it appeared that he didn't even really know Kathy. Unfortunately, the friend couldn't provide any more information about the man, but luckily for investigators, the situation was bizarre enough that it had made an impression on a number of those in attendance that day. After questioning several of them for details, one person was able to remember where they had seen this man before. He was a clerk at a local women's clothing store. Detectives questioned the man, who admitted that he did not, in fact, know Kathy Blair. He said that he had heard about her story on the news, and it made him sad, so he decided to go to her memorial and try to celebrate her life. This was certainly unusual, but the man denied having anything to do with the crime, and without any other kind of evidence, authorities had once again hit a wall. As luck would have it, though, they were about to receive another tip, and this one would completely change the course of the investigation. Several days into the Kathy Blair investigation, detectives with the Austin Police Department were busy chasing down any leads they could find when they received a call out of the blue from a man named Rob Leef. He said that he had something that he wanted to show them, something that he thought might be of interest to the case. It was some video footage he had recently taken while testing a new scope that he had purchased for one of his rifles, which was equipped with a thermal imaging camera. When Rob met with detectives, he explained that on the morning of December 6th, he had been out walking around his neighborhood in North Austin trying to get footage of deer with the scope, when he had witnessed something strange. At around 1:15 a.m., he noticed the bright beams of some headlights behind him, and turned to see a car driving slowly down the road. It eventually came to a stop, though this stuck out to Rob as well. It wasn't in an area where anyone who actually lived there would have normally parked. After stopping, a man got out of the car and began walking down the street. He had turned onto Tamarack Trail before heading out of view. At first, Rob hadn't thought much of the unusual early morning encounter. The next day, he flew to Las Vegas for a trip he had planned with friends, so the whole thing kind of quickly left his mind. It wasn't until a couple of days later, when he read about Kathy's murder in the news and saw her address, that he started to realize that what he had seen might have been important. He had gone back to check the footage he had taken. Sure enough, he had captured video of both the car and the mysterious man. The footage itself was grainy and shaky, as Rob had been testing his scope at the time and was flipping through various settings. Also, since it was a thermal camera, the images it had captured were more like silhouettes, as the device was designed to pick up heat signatures. Still, as authorities reviewed the video dozens and dozens of times, there was enough detail to pick out a couple of important things. The man who was captured walking towards Kathy's house was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a unique sort of stride. Detectives were also fairly certain they could at least rule out certain vehicles using identifying features of the unknown man's car in the footage. This proved to be true when neither the vehicle owned by Kathy's second husband or the strange man at her memorial remotely matched what had been captured in the video. It was progress, but unfortunately it now meant the detectives effectively had zero suspects. Not only that, but things were about to get a whole lot more terrifying. On December 15th, 2014, just over a week after Kathy Blair's murder, Austin police were called to the scene of another chilling crime. They were alerted by a home care nurse named Dow Catrola, who explained that she had arrived at the residence of two of her patients that day elderly couple Sydney and Billy Shelton, only to encounter a terrifying situation. Upon approaching the front door, Dow noticed that it was ajar. It hadn't simply been left open, though. Splinter marks in the wood suggested something far more ominous. It had been deliberately broken. After receiving no answer to repeated knocks and attempts to call inside, Dow hesitantly entered and walked towards Sydney and Billy's bedroom. What she saw disturbed her to her core. The couple was dead, and there was no question that they had been the victims of a terrifying attack. Upon arriving at the scene, Austin police confirmed the details of the horrifying discovery. Sydney and Billy had been viciously beaten and stabbed to death in their bed. At first glance, the disturbing crime didn't seem to make much sense. Sydney and Billy were the last people anyone would have expected to meet such a brutal end. They were in their 80s, had no enemies to speak of, and had been happily married for 64 years. They lived modestly, had never been wealthy, and were loved by their family, friends, and neighbors. However, as detectives walked around the bedroom, they soon spotted something that made their blood run cold. Just like with Kathy Blair, a jewelry box in Sydney and Billy's bedroom had been ransacked, its drawers completely removed and thrown on the floor. It was like they were looking at the same crime scene all over again. Likewise, the other similarities between the two cases were too much to overlook. Both attacks had taken place in the victims' bedrooms. A knife had been the primary murder weapon, and blood evidence revealed that the victims' jewelry had been stolen after they had been killed. The crimes had also taken place in the same general area. The Sheltons lived just a 15-minute drive south of Kathy, in Austin's Brentwood neighborhood. Though convinced that the murders had been committed by the same perpetrator, try as they might, police struggled to find any sort of connection between the victims. Kathy and the Sheltons hadn't known each other, and there wasn't any obvious social link between them either. They attended separate churches, had separate friend groups, and as far as police were aware, hadn't even so much as shopped at the same grocery store. However, with a possible serial killer now on the loose, authorities knew it was likely only a matter of time before their culprit struck again. Fortunately, just when it seemed like the stakes couldn't get any higher, they got a tip that would begin to tie the whole case together. After connecting the murders of Kathy Blair and Sydney and Billy Shelton, Austin police were desperate to find something concrete that linked the victims, believing that this would be key to unmasking the killer. Worried that the suspect would strike again if they didn't act quickly, they began expanding the pool of people they were interviewing, hoping that if they cast a wide enough net, they would find what they were looking for. The tactic paid off when detectives got in touch with Kathy's friends, who shared a piece of information that they hadn't come across up until now. The friend said that a few months ago, Kathy had mentioned an uncomfortable interaction she'd had with a handyman who had been hired by her landlord to do some work at the rental property where she was living. Kathy had complained about the quality of the work the man had done, and had also described him to the friend as creepy. Investigators spoke to Kathy's landlord, who said that they remembered the incident. The handyman's name was Timothy Parlin. As authorities would soon discover, Tim's brother was a deacon at a local church, the same church that Billy and Sydney Shelton attended. That wasn't all the detectives learned about Tim, though. While the 49-year-old now did a variety of odd jobs, this wasn't always the way that he had made a living. For most of his adult life, Tim Parlin had been a thief, one who specialized in stealing jewelry. Fortunately for investigators, Tim wasn't difficult to locate. He was out on parole after serving a lengthy prison sentence for multiple burglaries and was living out of a local extended stay hotel. When detectives traveled to the hotel, they found Tim, who agreed to speak with them, though in the parking lot, not his room. He didn't seem nervous, and when asked, initially said that he didn't even remember his supposed run-in with Kathy Blair. He eventually changed his mind once police began providing more details, but claimed the situation had been blown out of proportion. Besides, he said, on the morning of the murder he had been working an overnight shift at a local 7-Eleven. Though authorities were certainly suspicious, they didn't have any information that could dispute Tim's version of events. That wasn't their only problem either. Neither Tim nor his vehicle were a match to the thermal imaging footage that Rob Leef had provided. He drove a van, not a car, and unlike the man in the video who was tall, Tim was short and stocky. With that, detectives let Tim go on his way. No sooner had investigators done this, though, than they discovered that the 49-year-old's alibi was a complete fabrication. When they called his manager at the convenience store, they learned that Tim had been fired at least a week before Kathy Blair was murdered. Upon racing back to the hotel, authorities found that Tim was no longer there. This turned out to be a stroke of luck, though, as instead, they were greeted by his wife, who did allow officers to perform a search of their room. The search revealed a key piece of evidence, a slip from a local pawn shop. It showed that Tim had pawned a piece of jewelry on the exact same day Kathy's body was discovered. Sure enough, when detectives followed up with the pawn shop, they were able to confirm that the specific item Tim had pawned was a pendant that belonged to Kathy Blair. Surveillance footage obtained from the business shed light on another part of the mystery. At the time Tim traveled to the pawn shop, he had been driving a dark green Toyota sedan. It belonged to his sister, and bore a striking similarity to the vehicle in Rob Leef's video footage. The resemblance was enough for police to obtain a warrant to impound the Toyota. A search of the car uncovered the most crucial piece of evidence yet: blood on the front passenger seat and floor. Testing proved that it belonged to Kathy Blair. Following these discoveries, detectives brought Tim Parlin in for questioning. When confronted with the evidence, though, he still denied everything and began to repeat the same bizarre phrase over and over again. Quote, "These hands didn't kill anyone." The interview grew more and more heated, until after several hours, Tim finally cracked. He said that he would tell investigators who really did it, then stated that they needed to speak to a man named Sean Gant Benalcazar. When detectives first heard the name Sean Gant Benalcazar, they were more frustrated than intrigued. They knew that they had Tim Parlin in a tough spot, and they figured that he had simply spit out the name of a random person, knowing that police would have to investigate what he said before continuing with their case against him. A closer look into Sean's background seemed to confirm this suspicion. He was a 30-year-old former high school science teacher with a degree in microbiology who had never been in trouble with the law. He also lived more than 200 miles away, in the city of Galveston. Still, for the sake of thoroughness, detectives arranged to meet with Sean at a police station close to his home. The interview started off smoothly, with the 30-year-old saying that he had no idea what was going on. Still, he said he would help out in whatever way he could, explaining that he had only met Tim Parlin a few months ago, but even in that brief time, he could see that he was dangerous.
We're investigating a murder in Austin, and in particular, we're looking at Tim Parlin as the person that we believe committed the murder.
I'm completely in the dark on this. Who was murdered?
The thing is, honestly, I want to help you guys out because this guy, wolf in sheep's clothing, basically, didn't tell me anything about his past. And I'm starting to feel like he set me up like a patsy or something.
As casually as the interview had started, things soon began to head in a more disturbing direction when they asked Sean routine questions concerning his whereabouts on the nights of the murders. To the surprise of investigators, the 30-year-old not only admitted that he had been in Austin during the weeks that both crimes had taken place, he said that while in town, he had been staying with Tim Parlin. Over the next several hours, Sean's statements increasingly went off the rails as he gave multiple conflicting accounts of his actions on the night of Kathy Blair's murder. He began by saying that Tim had disappeared on his own for a good chunk of the night, before eventually saying that he had been with him in the car when they went to Kathy's house.
So where are you sitting in the car?
Passenger seat. Came back with a sack, had blood on it, threw it in the passenger floorboard, and I took a peek at it. It had jewelry in it, and I didn't want anything to do with it.
When did you figure out that it had something to do with the murder?
The fact that it had blood on it was not a good sign.
While it's safe to say that investigators were already stunned by how this interview had unfolded, things were about to take another turn when Sean asked to use the restroom. It was when he got up and began walking down the hall that one of the detectives noticed it. That same distinctive walk they had seen in Rob Leef's video footage. It was Sean, not Tim, who had gone into Kathy Blair's house. This was confirmed when the interview resumed and police began asking the 30-year-old far more direct questions about the murder.
Did he bully you into going into the house, or?
I was scared, and he was taking a threatening tone.
He told me to go in the house and get the stuff.
Came in through where? The back door, you said?
Yeah, it was open.
Okay. Open, unlocked?
Yeah. I looked around and kind of prowled and snuck through quietly. And I turned on a couple lights in rooms where I didn't see her. I found the room where she was, and she was fast asleep. That was the room her jewelry box was in.
Okay.
And so I opened the jewelry box, took the stuff out, put it in the thing. Maybe he went back? I don't know. Okay. But I didn't kill her.
While Sean was still trying to avoid responsibility for the actual murder, detectives were confident that based on his statements, he had to have been the killer. This is because he had already admitted to touching things in the room, things like Kathy's jewelry box, that had blood on them. It showed that she had already been dead at the time the things were stolen. When confronted with this information, Sean finally confessed to Kathy's murder.
She woke up, she lunged at me, grabbed the knife, started trying to wrestle it out of my hand. And then it was a struggle, and I stabbed her in the neck.
If investigators had any shadow of a doubt as to Sean's guilt, this went away too when they discovered that he was wearing the same shoes during the interview that he had during Kathy's murder. Impressions were taken that matched the bloody footprint left at the crime scene. Making matters even more chilling, when pressed for a motive behind the killing, Sean had little to offer. He revealed that Tim had been the one who kept the jewelry, and that he hadn't gotten any of the money from its sale. This was the last piece of information that the 30-year-old would provide, though. As soon as detectives tried to ask him about the murders of Billy and Sidney Shelton, he asked for a lawyer and ended the interview. Perhaps unsurprisingly, when Tim Parlin and Sean Gampin Alcazar were arrested, both men pointed the finger at the other. Tim ended up admitting that he had driven Sean to the scenes of both crimes, though said that he had nothing to do with the killings. Unfortunately for him, this didn't actually matter, as in Texas, if you take part in a crime, you can also be charged with that same crime. Given the evidence against him and the fact that he was the only one with connections to all of the victims, he was charged and ultimately convicted of capital murder in all 3 killings. The case against Sean proved more challenging. Since there was no physical evidence tying him to the murders of the Sheltons, he was never charged with their killings. By the time he went to court for Kathy Blair's murder, Sean had not only recanted his confession, he had accused police of coercing it out of him. He claimed that detectives had threatened him when he stopped the interview to go to the bathroom, and that they told him they weren't going to let him leave until he said he was guilty. The tactic appears to have worked. At his first trial, there was one holdout on the jury, and the proceedings ended in a mistrial. However, when Sean was tried a second time a few months later, the prosecution was better prepared, and he was found guilty of capital murder. Testimony from Rob Leef and the video footage he took was apparently crucial to securing that conviction. At the time of this recording, both Tim Parlin and Sean Gampin Alcazar are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. I'm honestly not sure what bothers me more about this case, the complete and utter senselessness of it all, or just how close it appears things came to justice not being served. On the first point, it doesn't really seem like there was ever a real answer given as to why these murders were committed. Part of that is undoubtedly because Tim and Sean continue to deny responsibility for the crimes, though even beyond that it seems like these were just really senseless killings. The closest Tim ever appears to have come to offering an explanation was implying that a personal grudge had motivated him, at least in Kathy's case. According to reports, he said in an interview with police that he targeted her because he felt he, quote, didn't get a fair shake after she complained about the work he did at her house. As far as we know, he has never commented about what he may or may not have had against the Sheltons, though it wouldn't surprise me if it was something equally petty. As for Sean, we can only speculate, though no matter which way you slice it, things look a lot darker. At least in Tim's case, you could argue that he wanted the jewelry that the victims had. But with Sean, he basically admitted that material gain wasn't a factor. Barring any new information, therefore, it seems that the only real explanation left on the table is that he murdered 3 people just for the hell of it, which is truly horrifying. Taking all of that into account, let's move on to point 2. Originally, I thought it was really cool that detectives managed to catch Kathy, Sydney, and Billy's killers in part using the footage from the thermal imaging camera. However, the more I thought about it, particularly the way that it ended up being crucial evidence at Sean's second trial, the more it sort of unnerved me. And look, it's still really cool from an investigative standpoint. I'm not trying to take away from any of that. But at the same time, there's just something really unsettling to me about the thought that Sean could have walked free if some guy hadn't been walking around his neighborhood at the exact right time playing around with a new piece of tech he had just bought. To some degree, I think even Rob Leef felt that way. According to reports, he ended up leaving the neighborhood shortly after all of this was over. In an interview, he explained that he needed a change. As usual, this is turning into a rant, so I'm going to cut things off here. But we're interested to hear what you all think. What bothers you the most about this case? And do you think we'll ever fully understand what happened? Regardless, our thoughts are definitely with the families and friends of Kathy Blair and Billy and Sydney Shelton. 3 lives that were tragically cut short in one of the most terrifying ways imaginable. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.